If you scroll through social media, you would encounter videos like this.
I had an eye-opening experience with my son this weekend. So my son graduated from college 6 months ago. And when he graduated, he was going to move back in with us so that he could find a job here in this local area and save up enough money to move out on his own. Had no problem with that. So it's been about 6 months. He has saved almost every single dime. He works a 40-hour-a-week job. Makes $40,000 a year, which back in my day was sustainable to be able to live. Apparently that's not the case anymore. You can't live on $40,000, which makes no sense to me.
All my credit cards are maxed out. I haven't made a payment on my credit cards in months because I have no money to do it. My savings is exhausted. There's nothing in there. Gas overnight has gone up 16 cents where I live. It is now $4.15 a gallon. I just want to know, what are people doing? Because this is getting really scary. I can't buy groceries. My electric bill is $400 a month. My house payment has gone up $100 or $150 a month. I don't know what they expect people to do.
So why does everyone who works 40 hours a week can't afford a living? The first thing you have to know is this is no accident. It's all by design, and this design is called modern monetary theory. I know it's a big word and seems boring, but bear with me and you will learn about MMT, also known as the monster that's eating your wallet. This modern monetary theory was coined by Australian economist Bill Mitchell in the early 90s, which states that monetarily sovereign countries like the United States could simply create more money via fiat currency without consequence, as it's the issuer of the currency. And they are not operationally constrained by revenues like tax when it comes to federal government spending. Simply put, the government can create or print as much money as it wants to cover its costs, and it can't default on its debt denominated in its own currency. So it can borrow as much money as it wants just by raising the debt ceiling and raises interest rates to fight inflation if and when it arises. For example, the United States federal budget for 2023 was $6.1 trillion, while its tax revenue for the same year was $4.4 trillion, with a debt of $1.7 trillion. So you might think to yourself, how this affects me in my life? It is very simple. What determines the value of goods like the computer or phone you're watching this video on? Hit that like button while you're at it. Or the value of a house or a car you want to buy is the quantity of these products on the market, compared to the amount of dollars in the market used to purchase them with. So when the government runs a $2 trillion deficit annually, that means it is injecting additional $2 trillion per year into the market. And when the amount of dollars chasing the limited number of goods increases without an equivalent increase in the number of goods in the market, it results in inflation. But this is only the beginning and doesn't explain why so many people couldn't afford a living by itself. The second factor is the rising interest rate. So the unlimited printing of fiat currency will inevitably result in inflation, and in order to reduce these inflation, central banks will increase interest rates. In the United States, for example, during 2019, the interest rate was 1.5%, which means you only had to pay $1.50 interest for a $100 loan from a bank. Then the pandemic hits and businesses got shut down and people lost their jobs. In order to protect the economy, the Fed lowered the interest rate to effectively 0%, and this 0% interest rate lasted until 2022. We'll get to that, but in the meantime, Congress passes the COVID relief bill with a cost of $2.8 trillion. And in March of 2021, they passed the American Rescue Plan with a cost of an additional $1.9 trillion, which bring the total cost of the COVID relief to $5.2 trillion, adding appropriation costs to these bills. The national debt increases from $22 trillion in 2019 to $33 trillion in 2023, which means around 40% of all the dollars that ever existed was printed in the 12-month gap between the COVID relief bill and the American Rescue Plan. So think about it. $5.2 trillion in 12 months. For context, this money is higher than the GDP of every country in the world except for China and the United States. So you might be asking yourself, if the United States print this much money, why isn't its inflation higher than the single digits? And why didn't it become like the inflation in Venezuela or Zimbabwe? It is because the US dollar is the reserve currency of the world. This means the only people dumber than the Federal Reserve who keeps printing money are the central banks of other nations who keep purchasing their bonds. Because the Fed print money by selling government-guaranteed securities like treasury bonds, and other nations, individuals, or corporations purchases these government bonds, which provide a fixed yield. For example, the US 10 years Treasury yield is around 5%, which means the Treasury sells these bonds at a 5% interest rate. What doesn't make any sense? is why the central bank of other countries would choose to invest their money on what basically is a legal Ponzi scheme, in which the Federal Reserve keeps selling these bonds to pay the previous investors or sell their goods and services for a currency with no backing. So if you have any thought on this or think this is wrong or incomplete, please leave your thoughts in the comment. Let's get back to our main topic. So, the government had printed a bunch of money from 2020 to 2021 with 0% interest rate. And people, being locked inside their homes, were spending money without producing goods. And the lockdowns didn't help the supply chain either, with goods being stuck on ports or not being produced at all. And with demand being high, with a bunch of free money flooding the market with 0 interest rate, and a supply chain crisis limiting the supply of goods, inflation rose to a 40-year high of 8%. So in 2022, the Fed increased interest rate for the first time in 2 years from 0 to around 2%. But the inflation didn't subside because they keep printing money at the same time they raise the interest rates, which is an oxymoron. But that's the only choice they have not to cause a recession during a midterm election. After the election, they keep increasing the interest rate, now reaching 5.5%, and the inflation rate has subsided to 3.1%. But because the interest rate is so high, people couldn't pay their mortgages and forced to sell their homes to large hedge funds that paid above market value or increased the price of rent on their tenants to cover the rising mortgage payments. When it comes to food prices, the inflation rate is not a good measure. Rather, the Consumer Price Index is a better way of estimating the prices of food, housing, medical care, and other expenses. And unlike the inflation rate, which doesn't take into account the price of food and energy, the two most important expenses to anyone next to housing, the CPI is measured by the Bureau of Labor Statistics and not the Federal Reserve. And according to the CPI, the food price index is around 120, which means the price of food is 20% higher than it was during the base period of 2014 to 2016, still very high compared to the pre-pandemic index of around 85, which means post-pandemic the price of food increased 35%. This is without considering shrinkflation, where the price of goods stay constant but the quantities of goods you get for that price keep reducing. So what's the solution? We've got 2 solutions. One is hard to do but is feasible. The other is preferable but is not feasible. Let's start with the preferable choice. Since what causes the inflation is the unlimited supply of money trying to purchase limited number of goods, we increase the number of goods in the market. You can see this effect in the shipping crises of 2022, where a large number of ships couldn't deliver their goods on the ports of the West Coast, leading to shortage of goods like children's formula, and it was solved when the logistic problems were solved. But since the government didn't stop printing money, there will never be enough goods in the market to match the government's spending, because producing goods is not as easy as printing money. The second and the feasible choice is, first, for the state, need to pass a law forbidding corporations and hedge funds from purchasing single-family homes, which are the single most important source of wealth creation for middle-class people, and in turn lowering the rent for working-class families, which seems unlikely because the government is controlled by large banks and wealth funds. Second, the government needs to stop its unlimited printing and spending, instead trying to pay off its debt using tax dollars, and increase interest rates further, which inevitably would lead to a recession in the short term, but it will solve the inflation problem in the long run. But the government is unwilling to do that, because any government which causes a recession is sure to lose power comes the next election. I know this video had been a bit of a downer, but I've got a video for you on how you could make some money by adopting the methods of the rich during difficult times like this. Click on the screen, check that video out, and don't forget to subscribe.